Welcome to the pre-recorded demonstration, Let's Commit, Collaboration, Ownership, and Accountability. My name is Jaime Stief. I work at the Tamarack Institute, and it's my pleasure to introduce my colleagues Liz Weaver, co-CEO of the Tamarack Institute, and Sylvia Cheuy, Director of Collaboration at the Tamarack Institute.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jamie. Here's what we want to try and cover with you. We want to spend some time really digging into this notion of collaborative leadership, because that's actually the foundation for building a matrix of accountability and sharing some tools, some resources, and some commitments and reflections. So, what is collaborative ownership? Let's go dig right into that. I think the thing I would say as a frame is that it's awfully hard to have good accountability across a collaborative partners if there isn't first a strong sense of commitment. And for us, some of the things that we've learned is, collaboration and commitment to it is a choice. And so it's really important. These are a set of really important things that we can invite partners to pay attention to. Doesn't have to be the whole list, just about picking one, picking two to really focus on at each meeting. And to me, this just reminds us that it's as much about how we are with one another as it is the work we're doing. And David Crislip certainly brings this home. But what I really value about David's quote here is he's reminding us that when you create the appropriate container, people will come together and will be able to come up with creative, authentic solutions that work for their community. And again, another really important take for each person stepping up to the collaborative table, right? To be a leader in a collaborative context requires us to shift our thinking from what many of us might be more familiar with when we're coming from an organizational context. And again, a lovely list of those shifts in thinking that are particularly important. And I think a lot of it speaks to, as you can see, willingness to step in, to probably take greater risk than many of us might be used to when we're just working with the same people, because we're building new relationships and new connections. So at the end of the day, the reason that we're paying attention to collaboration process and mindsets is that the objective, as important as the work we're doing, is to create a sense of shared or collective ownership across all partners who are part of this work. And so the key ingredients to feed that collective ownership are, commitment to a shared agenda or common agenda, a real sense of how your own organization's mission and purpose aligns with that of the collaborative work, a commitment to contribute and share resources, and a commitment to bring yourself, your thinking, your leadership, and your curiosity. So for us at Tamarack, one of the tools that we find particularly useful in setting the stage for good collaboration is this collaboration spectrum. What I really love about it is that it reminds us, even if we use the same word, collaboration, to different partners who come from different experiences, what that mental picture that comes to us when we think about what we mean by collaboration could actually be wildly different, right? I also love this visual for a couple of reasons. It reminds us that to collaborate well for the long term on the far right requires the highest amount of trust. And it takes time to get there. Also reminds us that there are a range of choices. When we choose to collaborate, if it's just a one-off collaboration on a specific project, we may not need the same level of commitment and trust to execute. But often what we found is that those early one-off collaborations between various partners often set the stage and create the foundation from which over time there's growing interest and curiosity in working together more intentionally over the long term towards shared aim and shared purpose. Anything you'd add here, Liz, about the spectrum?
I find the spectrum to be really helpful when we think about collaborative ownership, because if people think, oh, we're only here to communicate, that's the level at which they're owning their role in it. But if they are more intentional about coordinating or collaborating, they're also then thinking about their role and their contributions. So getting agreement about where you are on the collaboration spectrum, I think, is really helpful. And I think, Sylvia, we have you and I have both facilitated multiple groups and collaborations around this tool, and really have learned quite a bit when groups come to sense make both where they are right now and where they might want to be in a year, 2 years, 3 years from now.
Yeah, and I think you're right. So this is, as Liz has mentioned, a tool. Like, this is how we've taken the collaboration spectrum and used it in working with groups, where we invite people with one color of dot to sort of say, where do we think across all the people at this table, these various partners, what do we think the current level of collaboration is? And then also maybe a different color. What is it? What's the level of collaboration we think might be necessary for us to achieve that which we're trying to achieve? And inevitably, there is a difference or a gap. And I always find it useful because it allows us to both explore that gap, but also then everybody sees very transparently that we're not all on the same page, or we may not all be, but that there is a shared commitment and a general agreement that we have to sort of tighten that up. And that becomes really important, as you said, for shared ownership. And I do think what this highlights when we talk about the importance of defining values and principles, a couple of things come to mind for me. One is it is reminding us of the importance of investing time in the process of collaboration as much as we are spending time focusing on the what we want to collaborate about, because that is what's the glue that really helps enable us to move that plan forward and move shared action forward. It's also really interesting because we don't think about this if we've come from an organization, because often we move into well-established organizations where those values, those principles have already been kind of clarified. And so it's easy to jump in and again, just assume that this collaborative partnership is going to work the same way our organization has. And it's that reminder that we need to be more intentional because this is different.
Yeah, and what we've shared here are the values and principles that drive Tamarack forward. They're not the ones that we're suggesting. It's just an example for you of some values and principles of how we work as an organization. Yours or the collaborations might be different and would be unique to what you've agreed to, but they're foundational when you draw on them from time to time. And you ask that really important question: to what degree does this, whatever we choose to do, help us advance equity and inclusion, or courage and learning, or action and impact? So not only the shared purpose, but I think the values and principles should be brought into the conversation as well, in terms of thinking about, to what degree are we living into the values and principles that we have set out for ourselves.
So it's a real accountability on the one hand, right? It's a lens of accountability. It is also, I think, a really good touchstone when we're at a point where we might need to prioritize things or make decisions that may not feel as clear and aligned. It gives us an anchor to go back to, which is one of the reasons why I'm about to introduce a second tool that we find really useful and helpful, called the Culture Design Canvas. And maybe the better part to do, Liz, is to jump to that visual. So there you see it. Now you'll see that it's originally was designed for an organizational workplace, but I do think it asks all the right questions. And I like how they framed the questions. But always, as with any of our tools, you got to take it and own it. If it's not exactly right for what you want and you need, it's fine to adapt it.
I like this tool. I like this tool a lot because what it does is it creates on one page a set of prompts that we really need to think about. That's, I think, pretty comprehensive. When we use this tool, what we will often do is recommend that you let people kind of look at it and have some quiet reflection time on their own first, to kind of populate the things that really matter to them before we engage in a whole group conversation. I think you can also use it, not just at the startup, but if you're in a time of renewal or if new folks have come into the collaborative, it's a beautiful opportunity to go back and reground and revisit because we may add things. And when I look across all of them, the one that really caught my eye at first was rituals. It's kind of one we don't see very often. And I really like that because it tells you, you know, some of those habits and routines are really part of how we create a sense of we. So this is a third tool that I just want to draw our attention to. What I really love about this tool, the 15% solution, is that we use it to help people pause and reflect about their own organization or the group that they are in as they're moving towards a collaboration, because it allows each partner some time to consider how work that they're already doing can absolutely contribute to the shared purpose and the shared goal. And it may not even need to be tweaked all that much, or, you know, just with a minor tweak, it can easily be part of what you as an individual or you as an organization are contributing to the collaborative purpose and why it's useful for you to feel a sense of ownership. I don't know about you, but one of the things that I often hear is I have been assigned my own work from my organization, and now I have the collaboratives work on top of that. And I think this is a beautiful way to give people pause to say, well, wait a minute, how might you help advance your own organizational goals and purpose, but doing it in a different way or in a complementary way? Anything you'd add here as you've worked with it? Any stories?
Yeah, I think with the 15% solution, I think sometimes we just go with the work and then we don't invite what people can bring to the work in. And then when we ask people around our collaborative table to take on some work, they think they have to own the whole versus discrete parts of it. So often I will take something. So the group might say, oh, we really want to work on our governance structure. So then I'll take a discrete part of the collaborative work and then say, oh, okay, so let's think about the governance structure. What are the pieces of it that you want to work on? We need to recruit more people. We need to do terms of reference. We need to do, right? Whatever those are. And then you ask the 15% solution, which is, you know, what is 5 to 15% that you could contribute to these discrete pieces of work? And it takes the heavy lifting and makes it chunkable sizes that everybody can contribute, because different groups have different terms of reference. Different groups might have different people that they're connected to that they might recruit because of a particular area. Different people might have different funder relationships. And all of a sudden, what seemed like a big piece of work is actually now shared amongst lots of people in the collaborative using their unique skills and abilities to get the work done. So yeah, when
I
you
love
take
it.
that way, it's a really easy and fun tool to
And
facilitate.
what's beautiful about your example is part of it is making it really concrete and tangible, like governance, right? So then now we know, whereas if I say, what can you contribute to the collaborative? It might feel really vague and you'll go, I don't know. And then as you do it a lot, as we become more familiar with each other's gifts and contributions and assets, then again, we get to tap each other and work more effectively together. So lots of wins there, I can see. So at the end, I love this, right? What are we talking about? These process factors are really about how do we effectively mobilize people and get them working well together. And this slide also highlights that we want the right organizations and or perspectives, but the nature and the characteristics of certain people are also important. We need people that are trusted by their peers, have credibility with their peers, right? They are knowledgeable. They're willing to not just think and offer advice, but actually roll up their sleeves and contribute to the action, which I think is important. This willingness and openness to be challenged, which can be uncomfortable sometimes, or to see how, you know, your best intentions might have been viewed or ended up being less than helpful for another perspective is awkward, right? And uncomfortable. So being willing to accept that and learn from that. Are there Other ones that you've heard folks raise that are really important?
Yeah, I think it's very contextual, of course. There might be people that are connectors, right? They can connect to other people or resources in the community, or they have a big network. There might be people that bring a lived or living experience perspective that can be really helpful to the conversation that the group is engaged in. You might look for certain perspectives, you might look for certain expertise, you might look for if the collaboration is facing a really challenging conversation, you might look for someone with facilitation skills. So connections, facilitation, perspectives, those are the kinds of things that often come up in this list.
I think the other one for me was being uncomfortable with not knowing, right? Because at the beginning, there's lots of people that love to roll up their sleeves, tell me what to do, and I'll do it. But in the uncertainty of trying to define our shared purpose and really getting to that clarity, it sometimes it's iterative. Sometimes we have to do a few dialogues and come at it a couple of times. And not everybody's comfortable with not being told, okay, this is how we're going to do it, and having it already predetermined. So you got to be comfortable with that, I think. Yeah.
These tools lead into this kind of governance process that we're going to focus on next, right? So when you think about people and you include them effectively, you set up the shared and common agenda, the values and principles that you're going to work through, some of the ways that you're going to work together using the culture design canvas, and also thinking about the type of people you want and how you're going to include them using the 15% solution. Then you can get to the governance part of it, or you can weave the two together more effectively. And I'll take us through the governance part, but call on you because you and I support lots of collaborations and collaborative work that's happening across multiple communities. So this part comes from some papers that we've collectively written at Tamarack under a section called Collaborative Leadership and Governance. And one of the papers explores some of those core governance documents that can be really helpful to support a community. And particularly a community collaborative. And we're going to spend some time at the very end looking at the accountability matrix, which is really key to all of this work. But all of these documents, all of these kind of core documents can be really helpful to collaborative, not only to set the ground rules or the agreements that the collaborative has, but they can also be really helpful for onboarding new people to a collaborative. And so we're only going to focus on 4 of them for this webinar. Other ones we focused on in other webinars, and other ones we focus on in workshops that we do on collaborative governance and leadership. And the first of these core governance documents, and it ties back to those agreements, right, of how we want to work together, what's our shared purpose, what's our values and principles, is this kind of approach to a collaborative purpose. And here's a simple frame. Some groups will use a theory of change approach. Other groups might use a logic model, collaborative groups, as they're trying to define, what is it that they're working on together. What I like about this design is this number one question, right? Or this number one approach, which is first you have to understand who you are. And it's not just you as individuals, it's you as a collective group of folks that are coming together to work together. And so if I were to think about a group that I recently supported, and I asked them who they were, and this was a group that was working on early learning, so 0 to 5 years, they would say, hey, we are parents, we are caregivers, we are people that are concerned about this big problem that we're trying to solve, and we're people that have resources and connections, right? So as they began to frame out who they were, that then led them really nicely into their collaborative purpose and the clear idea. That's where you can really leverage. So if we think about, okay, how do we leverage? What's a 15% solution? The who we are are the early adopters that we can then leverage into the 15% solution. And I think, what I've seen lots of collaborative groups do is miss the who are we? Who are we? And at Tamarack, what's the question we use a lot at Tamarack, Sylvia? I'm putting you a little bit on the spot here. The why is it?
Why is it important that you are here? So starting with the you and reminding yourself, right, that it isn't just about this work out here, but it's also about this work and where it sits in our heart, right? Because passion, as we know, is a fuel, right, for really good collaborative work. I love that distinction, right? Because you're right. Just because we identify a shared issue or opportunity, it's not synonymous with, so what is it we want to do together? So it's like, who are we? What is it that we're caring about, right? That shared idea. And that's not the same as what we are going to do. Like, it's not our job to necessarily solve the whole, because we probably won't, right? If we're really going after a complex issue. But what's the contribution we want to make together on this issue is a different question, but often I've seen them mashed together. And so I really appreciate that this graphic kind of separates those two, because they aren't the same, but they are aligned. The other thing I love, but would want to really highlight, is our understanding is that we can use a collaborative approach. If shared ownership at the leadership level is important, it's also equally important throughout the entire community and various stakeholders, partners, and perspectives. So the importance of engaging a broad network beyond the leadership table at almost every stage, and being okay to say, okay, this is iterative. Have we got it right?
And the thing I've said a lot to groups is that it changes over time. So all you need to do is get to good enough and then revisit it when it's appropriate, right? So what's our good enough collaborative purpose for now? And then as it changes and evolves, how do we come back at it? And how do we, because the we's might be different, the picture might be different, the outcome might be different, etc. So yeah,
the community context may have shifted, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the next core thing, and lots of collaborative groups jump over this as well, is to really define what your structure looks like, right? And so here's an example, just one of a couple of examples. We're going to show you two here. Lots of groups don't define their collaborative structure. They just assume that everybody who's involved in the collaboration knows exactly what role they're playing. And the more complex the collaboration, the less likely that's true, right? So in this case, everybody is working towards the shared outcomes, and it's a combination of community members, partner organizations, and then work groups that are working together as well. And there's a backbone infrastructure. So pretty simple, pretty illustrative, but yeah, so I think it's a neat way of kind of showing what your collaboration structure looks like. Here's another example, and so you would know this one, Sylvia, because we share it a lot. Do you want to speak to this one really briefly?
Absolutely. I think what it reminds us is that there's an ecosystem, right? There's an ecosystem that exists, and that ecosystem is the whole community. And not everybody's going to be involved, right, in your collaborative. And I think that's important to acknowledge. But I think it also delineates two key roles. One is that, as you mentioned, backbone infrastructure, which is not an organization. I think that's the piece that for me is really important. We've got lots of organizations. The purpose of the backbone is to create the infrastructure to enable our organizations and groups to work better together. So the backbone is really that strategic, taking the bird's eye view. And then we establish action teams or working groups to go deep and take on different priorities or different aspects of the work that need to move forward. There's the assumptions there with the little circles are that it represents diverse perspectives, both at the leadership table and similarly at the action group level as well. And that, again, we're all working to the same purpose. I like that it's non-hierarchical, because I think that really reinforces that sense of shared ownership, shared leadership that we absolutely need through the whole journey.
And what you might do with this one, if this is a structure that speaks to you, you might put people's names in here or organization names in some of the circles that are in the ecosystem. I love the part that the ecosystem is beyond the collaboration. And so sometimes the collaboration only looks internally to itself. And in fact, what it should be looking at is both internally to itself and externally to the ecosystem, because there might be things in the ecosystem that can be leveraged that can really help move the collaborative purpose forward.
That comment also reminds me that at that backbone table, the leadership table, we often have one where we designate fiscal host. And I think that that's important because we don't need to create a whole new entity and turn our focus towards administrivia. Can we leverage one of our partners to serve as the bookkeeper for the resources that have been earmarked for this collaborative project?
Yeah. So we know that the collaborative purpose, defining the collaborative purpose and thinking about the we in the collaborative purpose is important. Thinking about the structure is important, and actually drawing a picture of your structure, whatever it looks like, because each of your contexts is going to be different. The third kind of core governance document is is your group going to make decisions, right? And what decisions, need consensus, recognizing that consensus takes a long time to get to sometimes, which could live in the world of consent, what are hybrid kind of decisions, and what decisions you might give to a single individual, might be a small team, a small group of individuals, and what are some of the constraints around that. So having clarity around a decision making structure is also really helpful for collaboration. So that's kind of the third core document. There are a few others. And this leads into our final kind of resource. And the one that, we're going to focus on a little bit more is this notion of an accountability matrix, right? And so when we think about accountability, we really think about the reporting relationships. So different parts of the structure have accountability to each other, right? So, the community ultimately holds the broader accountability because the collaboration is working in service of the community. But those working groups would have a different set of accountabilities. If you have some staff, they would have accountabilities. If you have a fiscal sponsor, they have accountabilities. Your leadership table has accountabilities. And so how do we begin to think about and actually write down who makes what decisions and who's accountable to whom for what purpose? And if you don't write it down, sometimes people make assumptions, right? And assumptions can lead you down this road of not really knowing, or it can also destabilize the collaboration because someone on a working group assumed that it was their ability to make that decision or they're accountable for something when in fact it is an accountability to a funder, or the accountability lies somewhere else. And so what we've tried to do at Tamarack, and we're always trying to do this, is to think about how we might make some simpler tools, not to write down everything, but to do at a very high level, to develop at a very high level a tool that might be helpful to you. So here's an example, Sylvia, of an accountability matrix that we've shared probably hundreds of times now. And this is an accountability matrix for a collective impact initiative. And so there are in the first column, there are different roles that are affiliated with this collective impact initiative. So there's a convener, and they're also holding the money on behalf of the collaborative table. There's a leadership table. There's a small staff team that is supporting. So that would be your backbone infrastructure. Then if you think about the model with the ecosystem, there are working groups, and then there's this broader, community with other groups that are out there that at some point may intersect or may never intersect, but you want to kind of look at the whole ecosystem. And what we've tried to do here in this sample, or this simple accountability matrix example, Let's just give you some ideas of the primary focus and contributions, and then the accountability. So the convener and the fiscal sponsor makes sense. They're accountable for funding and reporting. They're accountable to the partners on the leadership table, and they're often a partner on the leadership table, but they're telling the leadership table, hey, I've sent in the reporting, and I recognize the work that you've done, and here's a report. And they're also accountable to the community for results. So they might, in their annual report, say, hey, we're the fiscal sponsor of this table, or we're the convener of this table. And so they're giving recognition to the collaborative work that is going on in the community. And in the example on the accountability list, you can see really simple, high level accountabilities that have been identified. Sylvia, as you look at this table, any thoughts that you have?
Yeah, there are two that really come to mind. I think most importantly, we've been focusing on how this is useful and helpful for the folks that are really leading and owning this collaborative project. But you can imagine if we have relationships and accountabilities individually to our respective organizations or groups, having something like this summarized on one page that we can share with others within our own organization or with our respective boards also, I think, gives them an important assurance that we're taking this seriously, that they can then understand their degree of risk, because that's their job, right? So I think, yes, predominantly for us, if we are the collaborative leads, but also to really think about it in terms of how we use it to assure those that we are individually accountable to is good. The other one for me is that sometimes we have dual responsibilities or multiple responsibilities. Like, we have a certain set of responsibilities to funders, which might be different from, the boards of our respective organizations or whatever. And so just also that's helpful, right? Because being intentional about documenting this for ourselves creates the space with which then we can share at the collaborative table the various accountabilities that the partners at the table have. And they may not all be the same. They often aren't, right?
They often aren't. And so we have both developed a tool at Tamarack around the accountability matrix. So you can read about why accountability is important and why we think about this at Tamarack. We also want to recognize, I think, that sometimes accountability might create more fracture or might create less equity in a collaborative table. So we want to also caution you to make sure that this is a helpful tool to you, not a tool that creates more challenges for your collaboration. We think it is a helpful tool. It's the degree and the depth that you go into. And so really thinking it through and thinking about, is this helpful? It's, I think, something that you can look at. There's a planning canvas that's available through this link on this slide, but also through the Tamarack website. And just like you said, Sylvia, and I love your comment about sometimes we are accountable to our own organization and to our own board of directors. You can add that as a part of the collaboration. And so you can add a couple of rows and say, okay, to my own board and to my own organization, here are my accountabilities as a result of being a member of this collaborative table. You might add another line around funders, right? Because different funders who might be funding the work might have different levels of focus, might have different decision-making things that they want to pay attention to. Some of the funders might be funding a particular project. So you can use this table and, like all Tamarack tools, adapt it to the unique nuances of your collaboration. But it really helps kind of frame for both yourself as a member of the collaboration and or for all the members of the collaboration to kind of start to, at a very high level, we're not saying you need everything documented, but at a very high level, kind of share what the rules are or what the agreements are that you have landed on. I think one of the things that we're trying to do with this webinar is to share with you tools that we commonly use in our practice as we're supporting community collaboratives, both within the Tamarack family, but also with external partners and others in our broader network. And, we have the, I think, great good fortune of seeing multiple collaboratives both succeed and sometimes stumble. And so I know you and I and our team are all continually thinking about how can we make those stumbles less frequent or less perilous, right? We're really trying to help the collaborative process move forward. And we hope through this webinar that you've been able to, find some tools that you didn't know about, learn a little bit more about some of the thinking behind the tools, and maybe experiment with some of the tools. I think, Sylvia, I heard from you that you don't have to use the tool in the format it's presented. Really adapt to your unique context, because every collaboration will be different and the people around your collaborative table are going to be different. So utilize those things that work for you, bring in the others when they're going to be helpful to you, or just leave them to the side.